Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth episode of the HKGAGPodcast. Today, we have another British topic to talk about today, and today our guest is Andy. Andy, would like to give yourself a brief introduction?
Hi everyone, my name is Andy. I'm a British-born Chinese guy. Um, I've been in Hong Kong for 8 years now. I've been fairly active in the local political scene. I am a content creator. I've got my own YouTube channel where I make documentaries about Hong Kong, mainly focusing on the history of Hong Kong and also the political situation in Hong Kong as well. And I'm a big fan of Hong Kong Gag and all of the associated social media accounts as well, which who I follow quite closely.
All right, that's very nice of you, Andy. Just a brief introduction. So, from what I know, you spent most of your childhood in the UK, right?
I did, yeah. I spent most of my childhood there, and the early part of my adult life until the age of 26, which is when I moved to Hong Kong.
And I believe you moved to Hong Kong with your family, just to check.
I actually no, I didn't. My parents are from Hong Kong, but when I moved over here at the age of 26, that was my own decision. I just wanted to change in life, a new challenge, change the scenery. Came over, and then a few years later, my parents joined me, and then my brother moved over as well. So
Ah,
yeah.
nice. So, what would you say is the biggest shock when you first started living in Hong Kong after spending so long in the UK?
Definitely the pace of things. That's the hardest thing to adjust to when you're coming from a place like the UK or probably most European countries, actually, because in most sort of European countries, the pace of life is a lot more relaxed. Even if you live in a major city like London, which is considered quite fast compared to the UK, it is very fast. Hong Kong is very fast compared to London, and when you're working in an office, answering to clients, answering to your boss, they just want things like straight away. Even when you go to like 7-Eleven, for example, like you can notice how quickly the cashier processes your orders and then moves on to the next customer. So just the pace of life is something that took a while to get used to. But after being here for 8 years now, I think I'm fully Hong Kongized and a pretty fast-paced Hong Kong person myself.
Mm, yeah, because I feel like when it went overboard, like it was kind of a shock to see how kind of like different it was. Like in Hong Kong, everything just feels so fast paced and modern, but in other countries it feels a lot more slower. Not necessarily like more traditional, but definitely a different feeling. Like even when I went to places like rural areas in Japan, like that was still a huge shock having lived in Hong Kong my entire life. Another question, just to get the ball rolling a bit more. What have what would you do you use English or Cantonese more in your daily life right now?
Um, it's a bit of both. So in my job, the team that I work with, so I work on the marketing team, and my boss is Canadian Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone on the team, can speak good English, whether they're local or expats. So I find myself using English a lot on my team, but when it comes to the rest of the company I work with, probably a bit more Cantonese. But Cantonese I might not be fluent at, but I try to make an effort every day just to speak as much Cantonese as I can because I'm trying to improve my level of Cantonese. And I'm also learning Mandarin as well, at very beginner levels at the moment, though.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I just Yeah. Anyways, when you first arrived in Hong Kong, did you start getting involved into like the local politics, or did that come later? And if so, how did that happen?
Uh, See, I'll be honest. First couple of years in Hong Kong, wasn't like hugely knowledgeable about the politics there. So I arrived in 2014, which is actually when a few weeks just before the first movement started, the Umbrella movement.
Yeah.
That was the peaceful protest where everyone sat along Central and Admiralty for like a few weeks, and I went down and I gave my support because I'm wherever I always support free speech and democracy, but I wasn't really like a fully understanding of what was going on here. I didn't know all the names of all the politicians or like the leaders or the activists. Uh, and then after that movement ended, like it was a few years of me just living my sort of typical expat life, and then maybe like 2019, like when the extradition law protest starters. I started noticing them, and a friend of mine, Will, is very, very knowledgeable in Hong Kong politics. I started asking, like, can you teach me more about what's going on? Just, tell me all the names of the people, take me down to some protests. And he did. He taught me everything, and that's when I started to acquire my knowledge. And then things started to escalate in 2019, and that's when I started to really get into the protests, like turning up at some of the radical protests and filming and making documentaries on it. And I've got to a point now where I feel like I know a fair bit about Hong Kong politics.
Yeah, because just like this kind of stereotype that those in the expat community don't really have a good knowledge of the Hong Kong political situation, which is partially true, but of course there are some like you or people in that community that may not be expats themselves, like you, who have made efforts to try and understand like the political life. I feel like pages like you're familiar with Chaos Hong Kong, like chaotic expats, right? Yeah, I feel
Yes,
that's like
I am.
exactly
Yes,
like
follow their account. Yes.
certain expats trying to get involved in HK politics. But the thing is, I've noticed is that most, if not pretty much everyone in the expat community who supports like the protests, who supports like democracy in Hong Kong, they tend to be much more moderate. Like I haven't seen anyone who's actually radical. I haven't seen anyone that's radical from that kind of like that expat international school kind of community.
Yeah, I think everyone is quite moderate. I mean, I did see one or two expat faces on the front lines during 2019, but there weren't many. I mean, I have a friend who's an expat who was radical, but yeah, by and large, if they are involved in politics, it usually tends to be quite moderate.
How radical was your friend? It's like out of curiosity, because that's the first time I'm hearing of someone like that.
Well, he was dressed up in the gear. So the funny thing was, when he was in full gear with helmet and black t-shirt and everything, no one could tell he was a Western expat. So he'd turn up on the front lines, and locals would ask him to do stuff in Cantonese, and his Cantonese ability is quite limited, so he was really not understanding what was going on sometimes. But he wasn't at the point of throwing petrol bombs or like that, but he was just there at the front lines helping out where necessary, maybe giving assistance to people that were injured, or ferrying them out of harm's way from the police, that sort of stuff.
Well, I thought you meant like radical in terms like beliefs, not really actions. Like people who support more the localist.
Radical.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry.
Okay, so yeah, okay, no, I understand. Okay, so I mean, he was radical in his actions. I think he was radical in 2019. He sort of believed that you needed some level of radical action to change the situation. I think in the past 2 years, though, he's become a little bit more moderate. He's sort of accepted the fact that, Beijing has sort of taken hold of the city. It is kind of, in his view, quite hard to fight against it now. So you might have to work with the situation there is right now. Work with the new LegCo to achieve things, with the mind that he's still a pro-democracy person. So it's become a bit more moderate for him.
No, because I feel like that's the opposite has to happen to a lot of people becoming a lot more radical as the situation in Hong Kong deteriorates. Just I've noticed that a lot of people start supporting a lot more just extreme viewpoints. Like an example of this would probably be something like the Trump supporters during 2019, 2020. Like there was a lot of yellow ribbons. Especially on Live HKG that were very, very very pro-Trump and anti-Biden. And I'm going to be honest, like I'm not the biggest supporter of Biden, especially after his first year in office. But you can probably tell that I'm not the biggest fan of Trump either, and I disagree more with Trump than Biden in terms of policies. And I feel it just kind of raises an eyebrow at the very least.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I detested Trump. I felt like maybe one or two things he did do were helpful, like the signing off of the Hong Kong Act. But I felt like he only signed that off really because he felt like he had to, like he was being advised to do that, not because he actually knew anything about it. To be honest, Biden, not a great president. I mean, not a great candidate, I thought, but he's sort of grown into it a little bit. I mean, he has taken a hard he's taken the stance of holding China attack differently from Trump, but he's doing it as well, just with a bit more sort of presidential style, rather than being like the guy Trump who's just reacting and saying stupid
And
stuff.
I feel like a lot of Hong Kongers saw Trump that he was very hard and therefore that meant he was very good. But I think just some people weren't really aware of like what it was like in the States. Another thing, like during 2020, a lot of people accused BOM of kind of like stealing the spotlight from Hong Kong, like just before the NSL was enacted. And I think that kind of like led some people to support Trump. And I was just thinking like, it's. I understand that yes, like the organizers they have Marxist views, and some of them, yeah, they probably have. Some people in the movement support China, but I don't think you should diminish the movement just because of that and say that it's seeing the spotlight or something.
Yeah, it's a real shame. It shouldn't really be that. And I know when Black Lives Matter came out, Hong Kong was sort of in the spotlight. It got taken away from the people here, but that shouldn't be a reason as to we should be against it. I mean, Black Lives Matter is something you should support. It's something that affects a lot of people worldwide. So it should be something that's in conjunction with the Hong Kong protests. I almost feel like
both are like trying to achieve like freedom and equality in a way. Yeah. Anyways.
Yes. Yeah.
What I was gonna say. Back to like your experience as a British-born Chinese. Do you often feel like that? Sorry, I should say. Sorry, I forgot what I was gonna say. But do you feel like that you often feel whitewashed in a way, or do you feel like that you are trying to make strives to blend in with the local community or stay mostly within the expat community?
I think if you asked me that question 8 years ago when I first arrived in Hong Kong, would have probably answered. I felt a little bit whitewashed, understanding the Hong Kong culture or even my Chinese parent culture. I feel like in the 8 years I've been here, I've become a lot more, shall we say, Hong Kong-fied. I identify a lot more with the local identity in Hong Kong. Taking part in the protests myself, but also learning about Hong Kong culture. So for me, I sort of look back on myself, my early years, and here in Hong Kong, just sort of, God, what I was a real ignorant expat back then. And now I see people within my community who are like me back then as well. And I feel like I should be that person that tries to bridge that gap, try, make them aware of what's happening, try and maybe educate them a little bit, show them news stories that they might not be aware of, make them aware of, political issues or cultural issues that, that they don't fully understand. And so, yeah, I am trying to be that person that bridges that gap now.
You often do that on your Instagram page, but also on your YouTube channel. And speaking of your YouTube channel, just like to kind of deviate the topic, I remember watching a video where you said you were, your family was originally from the New Territories and were indigenous Hong Kongers. Do you mind elaborating on like kind of that side of your family, like the story?
Yeah, so that is my dad's side of the family are indigenous Hong Kongers. I think in Cantonese you would call that Yun Goiman. And so I made a documentary on that on my YouTube channel. And just to give a brief history on it, I guess for people that don't know, the indigenous Hong Kongers were the original sort of Hong Kong Chinese that lived here. They're like these different clans here, Hakka, Punti people. They were here for hundreds of years, way before the British arrived. And the British arrived, colonized the land. But these people that lived here, the original indigenous people, were against that. They fought a short war against the British, and throughout British rule, they were always up against the British. So the British gave them a lot of concessions, such as the small housing policy, where they get the right, every son or male villager gets the right to build a house here in Hong Kong, and that policy has been around since the handover. Since it's been around like since forever. And so, so the interesting thing about indigenous Hong Kongers in here is that quite a lot of them immigrated to the UK in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and my dad being one of them. Reason being was that there wasn't much industry here for them. They'd lost a lot of their land to the British, who were building like these new areas like Taipo and like Ma and San. So they went over to the UK, and most of them started Chinese takeaways or Chinese restaurants, which is exactly what my dad did, and they made a fair bit of money out of it. But I guess for me, the thing that I mean, although I'm very proud of this side of my culture, the thing that I'm sort of against is the fact that so many of them are very sort of pro-government. And I guess the reason being is that a lot of the policies in Hong Kong benefit these indigenous villagers, and
Yeah.
historically they've been very patriotic to the Communist Party of China. So my dad is extremely like pro-government, and we're always at odds with each other. So that's really one of the the drawbacks of
Yeah, because
being from an indigenous Hong Kong
I also
family.
come into clash with my more pro-government, or like at least anti-protest, like especially back in 2019. Now, not so much anymore, at least. But still, like just I feel like other people just see like the CCP as like good, like they're rapidly growing economy, like Hong Kong's back to China. It's like that kind of like feel among a lot of the older generation in Hong Kong, and for the younger generation, it just doesn't feel the same, and we just we see China in a different light for like what it more truly is. Another question, just so earlier on I mentioned the more radical parts of the Yellow Ribbon camp. Do you have any thoughts like the more like the localist pro Hong Kong independence? What do you think of that part of the pan democracy camp?
Yeah, it's for me. I mean, I respect the views. Me personally, when it comes to the independence question, I'm not fully supportive of it. I can understand why people take that position. They feel there's no choice but to actually cut themselves off from China, because Hong Kong is such a different place to China, and we have different values. And right now, the CCP is sort of strangleholding Hong Kong politically. But for me, I just whatever people say, we kind of do need China, especially economically as well. And just becoming independent, that would potentially cause us a lot of problems. I mean, China could, potentially cut off a lot of things from us. So, whilst I support the whole democracy movement, I'm a very passionate supporter of democracy and free speech. I just don't think the independence movement is the way forward. But I fully respect people for having that view and supporting that.
Hong Kong definitely needs.
And I want to add to that as well. Sorry, yeah, I want to add to that as well. I just don't think taking away, making it a crime to support independence is a good thing at all. When people are supporting something like an independence movement, the government should be addressing why people have such grievances to actually want to have independence, right? They should be listening to their concerns and trying to make things better. I mean, in the UK, we have, a Welsh independence movement and a Scottish independence movement. And the UK is not making a criminal offence for people to support these movements, right? They're trying to address the issues of the Scottish people and the Welsh people. They're trying to see how they can make things better for them, why they want independence, right? And
and
that's how I think. That's why I think Hong Kong is sort of going wrong.
A more historical connection, and I feel like Hong Kong independence really only properly emerged in the last decade or so. Like before that, it was pretty much just like an idea a few scholars tossed around, but now it's still relatively a minority, I would say, but definitely more widely accepted than it was before the 2010s. And I'd say my view is just like, it is an option, but it's not the best option far from the best option in my opinion. And I believe that Hong Kong will always be tied for China for better or for worse, to be honest.
Yeah, I think in my view, we should remain a special administrative region and trying to continue that beyond 2047. But obviously, with the way things are, that's not going to happen. Hong Kong has its own identity, it's got its own values, and these things, it's very hard to change that. I know the CCP are doing their best.
Honestly, I would say that probably would want a more autonomous SAR system, but still remaining within China. Like probably, of course, like respecting democracy and being free to elect our leaders. Aside from that, and probably a lot more more autonomy, but independence,
Yes.
our independence is definitely something I'm a bit skeptical on, to say the least. Anyways, let's go back to like, um,
Yes. Yeah.
so what would you say is the biggest contrast between the expat community and the local society in Hong Kong?
Uh, well, I mean, right now it's probably the COVID situation, but I think that is changing. So the reason why I say that is at the start of the pandemic 2 years ago, I think most local people supported the idea of zero COVID and having a very safe society, where that was free of the virus, and that was really out of the expat community who were a bit more carefree about it. But I think in the past couple of
Yeah,
months, there's been a shift away from zero COVID, especially with the younger generation here in Hong Kong. There's more people that more local Hong Kong people that want to move towards zero COVID. So that sort of friction has gone. I guess maybe now the friction is, I guess, hmm,
yeah,
I wouldn't say friction. I guess it's just a difference. Like, that most expats that come over here, like they live fairly privileged lifestyles, and they all come here to work in, white collar jobs and senior management positions. So they live like a very different lifestyle to most local Hong Kongers. They're not very understanding of what's going on there, and that can sometimes cause a bit of frustration from local Hong Kongers. Sort of think the
it's kind of
expat community
true.
are completely
Some
ignorant to
people,
the problems here in Hong Kong. Uh, and then you have the expats. Some of them, not all of them, some of them who are getting a bit bitter because they're being criticised by the local Hong Kongers for not understanding.
yeah.
So there's that.
I
That's
think
the
a
sort
great
of,
example of
I
this
guess,
is
difference
Discovery
or
Bay,
friction
which
that I
I
see there.
make fun of a lot on Hong Kong Gag, and just Discovery Bay in general just feels like an example of the difference between the expat community and the local community, because it's just so different over there, and it just feels like it's like a bubble of its own. And I feel like just in general, a lot of local Hong Kongers just feel like that like you said, the expat community doesn't really care, and which is true to an extent, but it just feels like that generalizations on both sides is just not a good idea, to say the least. Oh,
Yeah, it is not a good idea, and I think I maybe fell into that trap a few times during the protest where I got a little bit emotional myself and went a bit overboard with my criticisms of the expat community. And I think I took a step back and realized, actually, if I do that to the expat community, I'm not helping them to cause and sympathize with the local Hong Kongers. So I took a step back and thought,
yeah.
let's try and build bridges
I
here. Let's not criticize the
because
expat community. Let's
like
try and
just
build bridges.
leaking a little bit about my past, just my personality, my history, I guess. My backstory. No, I feel like because I kind of grew up in a more international school environment, but my family was still very local, so I kind of was like in a bit of both worlds, and it kind of just felt very weird. And I just feel like that, like among people I've talked to, like before the protest, I think most were pretty much apathetic towards like the democracy, or just didn't know, didn't care. But I think after like the protest happened, and especially after national security law, I noticed that a lot of my friends, they started, you know, for lack of a better term, giving a shit about the situation. Of course, yeah, some people who already cared a lot, but those were more the people who, like me, came from more local families, and as such, they probably had a bit of a better understanding of the current situation in Hong Kong at the time, at least. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The national security law did get some expats, more knowledgeable and on board with what was going on here. What I see now is actually it's the continuing
Yeah.
zero COVID policy from the Hong Kong government, which is actually getting a lot more expats politically engaged now. Um, Simply because a lot of them are frustrated that they go on holiday and return without quarantine
Yeah.
or live their lives in uh, Soho or DB or whatever it may be. So
Yeah.
a lot more of them seem to
And I
be a
feel
lot
like
more
just
knowledgeable
I
on the
feel like
political
after national
situation
security,
because of that. So
a lot of people just were forced to kind of care because they noticed like things started changing a lot. I think pre 2019 protests, it just seemed that a lot of people just saw what the political, like the
mm,
divide between the pan democracy camp and the pro Beijing camp. as something that that most people, it's something that that was in the background. But I think the protest and the national security law forced a lot of people to pay attention, start supporting like the democracy and trying to preserve Hong Kong's identity. And like I know some stories. Like one of my friends was calling like the protesters cockroaches before, like during 2019. But then on the eve of national security law, he was saying to me how he was trying to convince the some of our other friends that the national security law was going to affect all of us and we should really give a shit, basically. I feel like, just like if that's one good thing that's come out of this situation, it's probably that. That just feels weird to say. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think totally agree with you. The one good thing is that at least more of the community, more people,
Yeah, I feel like some people
are
are more
knowledgeable and
united
involved
in a
now
way,
because of
but
what's
yeah.
happened.
What was I gonna say? Would you? What is one thing that you miss from the UK, having lived in Hong Kong for about 8 years or so? Yeah.
Oh, wow. It's difficult to pick one because there's quite a few things.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I would say pub culture, actually.
I wouldn't
I mean,
know.
Hong Kong does have British pubs. There's the Globe in Soho, which is pretty good, but it's not quite the same,
I
right? I
don't know
mean,
about pubs.
in well, yeah, I guess it's a hard no, maybe. Pub culture is very unique. It's like you go down there with your friends. Yeah, go down there with your friends, even your family sometimes. You just have a drink and you watch the football,
Mm.
you chat, you maybe have dinner there. It's just a place to hang out, really. I mean, here in Hong Kong,
Yeah.
you have bars, but people go to bars at nighttime to drink and maybe get, a bit
Yeah.
wild. And
I mean,
pubs
you
are kind of
definitely
not
have
like
some
that.
like public
Pubs are more for just
institutions
chilling
in
out
like
in.
areas like Sai Kung and like South Hong Kong Island, but right that pub culture is
Yeah.
very much not very existent in Hong Kong.
Yes.
This is another question. Are most of your friends within the expat community? Are they like
Yeah.
people who came here for a job, people who are like you British born Chinese or American born Chinese, or people who grew up within the international school community in Hong Kong? Ah, okay.
Um, I say it's all three of those people, all three of those groups that you mentioned. Actually, I think when I first came here, most of my friends were just expats that came over for a job. But I've sort of broadened a bit more and met different types of expats, and yeah, I mean they're all very different in their own ways, right? The international community people are all very
Yeah.
uh, well, I think they're all very like smart people because they went to international school and they sort of bridge that divide between local
Yeah.
and expat community because they've lived here, but they also speak English very well and
Oh yeah.
have expat friends. So
Um,
yeah, and I've got a lot of ABC and BBC
what
friends as well.
I was gonna say, I forgot. What would you say would be the big? You mentioned like pop culture in the UK. What would you say is the just biggest difference about just like apart from pop culture? What would you say is another big difference between the UK and Hong Kong? Apart from like the higher paced style of living in Hong Kong,
Uh,
like what?
um, I would say the main thing would probably be,
Hmm?
I guess people here are a lot more upfront. Uh, so in British culture, people are very reserved and polite, uh, a bit like Japanese people in a way, in that they may think a lot of things, but they won't truly tell you what they think of the situation or you. Uh, which there are good benefits and negatives to it. It means you always have to sometimes you have to read their minds, almost British people. I think with Hong Kong people, they tend to be a bit more sort of direct, particularly when they're under pressure or need to get something done. Hong Kong people will tell you exactly what they think. Uh, that's a big
Ah,
difference for me, and it's something that it took me a while to get used to because I was very British when I first arrived. I wasn't quite used to the communication style here in Hong Kong, but after
yeah.
8 years here, I'm I think it works
I
better in a way.
can't
You
really
get
speak
things
for
done
myself
much
because
quicker
I
when you're
never
more
been to
direct about
UK and I
things.
only visited Europe like once, and it was only for a brief amount of time. But I would say the biggest contrast, apart from like the different style of living, as you mentioned earlier, and I kind of elaborate on my own experience, would be probably just in general just how just dense in Hong Kong, not like just like the buildings or like it just feels like that. Everyone's just closer to each other, and just like I remember just like I forgot when was it, but I actually was visiting some relatives on the mainland, and even then, like just driving a long distance just felt so foreign to me, and just looking at like forums online, like people living in countries like Australia or America, it just feels so different. Like Hong Kong just felt so much more dense and city like, and I just can't really imagine a life that's so different like that. Even though I grew up kind of in an international school society, international school community, I'm still yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I think, yeah, the convenience and how everything's close to you and dense is like definitely something that's so different to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And I think people in Hong Kong maybe don't realize how convenient their lives are sometimes. Because I often hear from Hong Kongers like about places like the UK and the US, like, oh, they always say in Cantonese, "mo ye zhou," and I just think, well, that's actually how life is in most of the world, right? Life is a lot more relaxed and things are a lot less convenient. It's only in Hong
I
Kong
mean,
where everything's on your
like
doorstep and there's always something happening,
I feel like the
right?
closest thing I
So
would say would probably be like
um,
Singapore, but
yeah, that's
even
that's a
then,
major
like it's
difference.
so different. It's just I don't know. I don't know how to describe what Singapore society is like compared to Hong Kong, but it just
Yeah,
feels different.
yes,
Oh, another thing. Do you when you first arrived in Hong Kong, did you have any language
yeah.
barriers, or I mean, I presume you do, but I would like to hear your experience on it.
Yeah, I did. I mean, back when I arrived in Hong Kong 8 years ago, my
Ah,
Cantonese was not that great. It was very basic conversational Cantonese, and adapting to office life here was a real struggle. I got thrown into like a very
oh,
important presentation to a client within the first 2 months, and I had to present it in Cantonese. So I did a lot of rehearsals with my bosses for that. But it was very nerve-wracking for me,
yeah.
and trying to speak technical terms in Cantonese is like, oh, so difficult back then. I think in
Oh yeah.
general, there's been a few funny stories of me getting my Cantonese wrong in sort of conversations with locals.
Oh my
I once
fucking.
said to a
Oh
local colleague when
god.
we were at KFC,
Okay.
"Le mo gil gai ga le." I was asking her why didn't she order any chicken? She only ordered like she ordered rice. Yeah, but
Question. Was
everyone's been
that
laughing, and then they had to
where you're
explain
from?
to me that you
Was
know
that
what
in
that
like the
means, right? It
central area?
means it
Just a
means
question.
calling a prostitute.
Oh no. Oh no. No,
That
yeah,
was
I
it's close
sometimes
by
like
to Central
get
area.
kind of called out for my Cantonese, like mostly to my family, but like more recently as I spoke more Cantonese in like voice calls in this community in the Discord server. Links in the link tree if you guys want to join listening in the podcast. Some people don't like love me for like my Cantonese
Yeah.
pronunciation. It's like God, your Cantonese is like it's grammatically correct, but your pronunciation fucking sucks. I'm like just yeah, because I kind of ended up speaking more English just naturally. I only really spoke Cantonese either with certain friends, and mostly at home with family. Oh yeah, this is another interest. Do you speak Cantonese with your family, or do you speak English?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be Cantonese. My dad's English is pretty terrible, even though he's lived in the UK for like what over
Ah,
25
yeah.
years. And my mum's got better
Um,
English, but she
what
prefers to
would
speak in
you? Oh, just
Cantonese.
like what would you say? It's like another like a general question, but what would you say is your favorite place in Hong Kong, like at the moment?
Oh wow. Tough question. There's a lot of places I like.
Oh,
Um, this is going to make me sound a bit snobby expatty, but I really like the Poho area, which is that area on Hollywood Road just above Sheung Wan. Simply because there's a lot of nice cafes there and like just interesting things like art galleries and nice restaurants. Yeah, it's a very expat thing to say, but I do like that. So, but I also love going
Yeah,
to like the
I
local
feel
areas as
like
well, like
for like
Somsobo. I
areas like
love being around
Newtown,
there,
it
like
just feel
the sort of down
a
to earth
lot
working
more
class
like kind
nature
of
of
like
the area as well.
different in a way. Like kind of feels like I sort of feel like place like Shanghai, like just kind of like that
Yeah,
public housing feel. Just feels really nice. Yeah. Another question. I forgot what I was gonna say. So
yeah,
you mentioned that you
yeah.
mostly interact with the expat community, and would you say that sorry, would you say that at times you feel kind of entitled in a way, or do you feel like that you're much more privileged than others in Hong Kong?
No, I mean, I definitely feel like I'm privileged. To be honest, I I mean,
Yeah,
I think it's important to be aware of these things because if you're not, then you'll just act like an arrogant, privileged person and not know it, and that'll piss off people. So I try and remind myself often that I've come from a position. So I grew up in the UK. I was lucky enough to grow up, and go to a good school in the UK, and have a family that had a pretty comfortable lifestyle, and you know made my transition to Hong Kong a lot easier as well. So I'm fully aware of these things, and I just try to use that to think about that and trying to be humble about these things. It's important
yeah,
not to like alienate people. I feel, and try and speak to on their level, whatever
yeah. I
background
feel that's
they
also
come from.
something that
So that's what I try
you
and
know.
do
I feel
on a
like
regular
I
basis.
feel like some yellow ribbons, like some more radical, just see some expats as like see some of the yellow expats as too passive, or like it's like there was like this pogo around that said that blue ribbons can't become yellow ribbons because that's just impossible. And then some guy responded to it. I was like, no, here's some statistics. It's clearly not. And I feel just like things like that just feel like that there's like definitely the expert community is privileged, but I don't think
Yeah,
that again you don't have to dismiss them as all people who support the government or are politically neutral. Like a lot of them have made strides to learn more about the political situation or and support the pro democracy movement. And generally talking to a lot of people who have interacted with Hong Kong Gag, that is a growing group, I would say, within the expert community. I've noticed a lot more people like that. What was I gonna say?
mm, yeah,
Sorry.
yeah,
Out of interest, so you mentioned how you mostly live in it was interact in like the Ho area. Like I know you do some kind of urban exploration, right? Like yes, what would you say is the most exciting thing that you found? Like most exciting place?
yes. Wow. So many. Mm,
Yeah.
I'll say two. So I went to one just 2 weeks ago, which is the Ma On San abandoned mines. So in Ma On San, there were these mines that were created, I think, back in the 1920s or 30s. They were mining for iron ore.
Yeah.
The government closed them in the 1980s. They've been abandoned since then, but people like me still break into there and have a look, and you can see things that were left behind by the old miners, like some mine carts, even some like
Yeah.
old food cans, like tin cans, are in there. Um, that's a very exciting
Huh.
place to visit. The second place, I guess, is this place called
Where about?
it's called Lee Cottage in it's near Sartine. I actually made a short documentary on it on my YouTube
Oh
channel.
wait, heritage.
It is
Yeah, I know which one.
across the river from
Yeah,
the Hong
yeah,
Kong Cultural Museum, the Hong Kong, the museum with the Heritage Museum. That's yeah. Uh, it's this really old sort of half Chinese, half colonial style cottage that was built 100 years ago by
oh,
this powerful family called the Lee family. To be honest, we actually kind of broke in because you're not supposed to be in there. That it's not actually fully abandoned. Someone does come back there to like, um, keep the place. But inside there, it's just amazing. It's like this sort of Chinese colonial architecture. There's like this old South China Morning Post newspaper from like the 1930s in there. There's like old photographs of people from 100 years ago. I mean, it's all on my video that I made.
Have you
And
ever
yeah,
been
it's
caught, or
one
have
of
you
those
ever nearly been
fascinating
caught
places
while doing the
I've been
urbex?
to on my urban exploration here in Hong Kong. It's funny you say that. Just 3 weeks ago, we nearly
Exactly,
got
right? Like,
caught. Went to the
yeah.
ATV abandoned TV studios, which is on the way to Cycling. It's on Hiram's Highway. Yeah, it's this huge, like it used to be a massive warehouse that got turned into TV studios, and then it was abandoned about 15 years ago, I think. So we were like exploring. We were on the rooftop, like, about 10 of us, and then like this guy comes up and was like, it says in Cantonese like "Mo yok, mo yok, I'm calling the police now," uh,
Uh,
and we just ran. To be honest, like that. I mean, there was 10 of us. I don't think he would
yeah,
have
I feel
caught
like
us, so
that's
that's why we decided to
urbex. I never
run.
really did it myself,
But
because
yeah, that was the
yeah,
closest
but
I've
still,
ever
it
been to
just
being
seems very
caught.
interesting to like look at abandoned places in Hong Kong, and it just gives you like there's much more to Hong Kong than people thought. And I feel like there's things like urbex and hiking just really let you explore a different side of Hong
Yeah,
Kong. It's just like kind of like the more like hidden, like it definitely is quite interesting
yeah,
to go, and it just makes the city just feel a much more larger that is, and definitely gives you just different viewpoints on Hong Kong. I think that's definitely something that's always been very interesting. Um, all right, we're gonna start wrapping up now. Andy, do you have anything to say? Do you, like anything to promote?
uh well, I guess so. I mean, yeah, there's a few things. I mean, I've mentioned my YouTube channel. Please, support. I mean, I keep try and make regular like content documentaries about Hong Kong, but I'm also working on an NFT project as well with some friends, and it's for a good cause. So I remember last month, back in January, 2,000 hamsters were, in my view, unnecessarily and sadly culled by the Hong Kong government because they some of them caught COVID. And so we're creating a set of hamster-themed NFTs. So we have an artist that's working on it, and I'm helping to promote it. I'm the marketing person, and we're going to sell these NFTs, and all of
Yeah,
the proceeds,
I'm
except for
not
operational
really the
costs, will
biggest supporter
go
of NFTs, but
towards an
I'll be
animal
looking
welfare
into it
charity. And we're going to
cautiously, and
announce
I
which
hope
charity that will
you
be
do something good
fairly
with
soon.
the project. You do a lot of good, I should say. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
I'll be
Right.
honest.
All right. Thank you
Before
for
this
your
project,
time.
I
It
wasn't a huge
was
fan of NFTs, but
nice talking
because
to
it's for a
you.
good cause, that's why I got
We
involved. That's
hope,
why I
and for
support
the
it.
viewers watching this, we hope you come back for the 6th episode. See ya.